Hello everyone, Darcinova here. Wow, I got a haircut. What a concept. This video is something I've been wanting to do for a while, but I feel like it's time. Before I get on to my third season of my series reviewing the Star Wars Expanded Universe, I'm still looking for an intro that isn't Star Trek, that still has the theme that I'm aiming for. So, it'll be a while probably before I find one, but anyway, the subject of this video. I've been asked multiple times, actually, in the last year, where to start in the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Where do I begin? And rather than repeat the question over and over again in my comments, I figured I'll give them a link to this video, and that'll be the end of that. Now, this is in no ways, going to tell you every single series that you should read. No, this is just a basic tool to get you into the EU. These are various different books that I'm going to recommend. Now, things you shouldn't do. First off, if you're reading the Expanded Universe for the first time, don't start with the novels that are out of print. Not because they're bad or anything, because these books, despite them being really good, are really hard to find. And you have to go through third-party sellers on Amazon, eBay, and they can be kind of pricey. The goal is to get into the EU with spending as little as you can. So, no Jedi Apprentice, no Jedi Quest, and no Young Jedi Knights. Good books, but it'll become too much of a chore to get into the EU if you focus on everything. Also, another thing you shouldn't do not read chronologically. Like, don't start with this. Not because, it takes place before everything else. Not only is this not very good, it really isn't. It ends before it actually connects with anything. So, you could ignore the Dawn of the Jedi era completely because it doesn't really contribute to anything in the EU. It probably was going to at some point, but I'll get to that when I review the comics. Now, another thing you don't want to do. You don't want to read something at a point in the timeline you have no knowledge of certain characters. These require... They don't require, but it would help if you had an immense knowledge on the characters that are featured in these stories. This, I think, could be read before, anything else before, if you want to read this before the Thrawn trilogy, which I don't recommend it. Because this was intended to be a soft reboot at first, until the fans complained about it, and it was not a soft reboot. It's not. But I think the tone is too drastically different for what most Star Wars fans are familiar with. And even though this is my favorite story, not everyone's going to like it. It's very divisive. So, this is another story I would not recommend unless you have invested a decent amount into the post-Return of the Jedi Expanded Universe. This I wouldn't recommend until you've read the entirety of New Jedi Order. It could stand on its own. It's just, I feel like you would get more out of it. Now, another thing I would not recommend. The comics are overpriced. And getting these at Barnes & Noble or whatever that sells these are kind of expensive. And if you want to read the comics first, that's fine. Don't use Barnes & Noble. Use Amazon. Much cheaper. Or eBay, if you wish. Now, other things I don't recommend. The video games, well, they're considered as canon. So I wouldn't recommend those to get into the Star Wars Expanded Universe. Now, I'm going to recommend certain stories, just selected ones, some of my favorites, and just to get yourself started. If you're someone who has played Knights of the Old Republic, and you're interested in reading more about the Sith, look no further than Darth Bane: Path of Destruction. A really good story. Love this. This is my gateway to the Star Wars expanded universe. And Drew Carpenson did a great job with this novel. I love how it ties into the rest of the EU. Highly recommend it. If you're interested in reading stories that don't feature Jedi and you want to read about Rogue Squadron or the Imperials, X-Wing Rogue Squadron would be a good place to start. It's part of the series, but if you're interested in reading a story that doesn't feature, characters from the movies, this features Wedge Antilles as a protagonist. This is something you would like if you're into that. If you're more reading about the darker side of the Star Wars universe in the time of the prequels, here's Darth Maul Shadowhunter. This, it leads to episode 1 in such a great way. It's not necessary to read to understand episode 1, but it is a really good story. And it just showcased how scary Darth Maul truly is in this book. And it also showcased that Darth Maul works best when he's not talking too much, when he's mysterious. This is my favorite Darth Maul story. You're looking for a story of lots of action. This is definitely the one that will, satisfy you. Lots of action, lots of violence, lots of blood. Great stuff. This is also something I recommend. Even if you're not a Darth Maul fan, if you want to read something different from Star Wars, something that's, that's darker than normal, I definitely recommend this. Really good. Now, don't let the canon status of these stories, drive you away from reading them, because they're really good regardless. A good story is good regardless if it's canon or not. This isn't a debate about what canon and legends, because this is just recommending a good starting point. Now, in my opinion, the best starting point is Heir to Empire. This is a really good book. Not only is this kick off the trilogy of the Thrawn trilogy, this also is a good way to see what happened after Return of the Jedi. Now, I know I'm going to hear in the comments section, but we already know what happened after Return of the Jedi. True. However, some people may not be satisfied with what they've read in the new canon, or don't like any of the new movies, and they want something else. Well, this is something I recommend. Much better than The Force Awakens, I can tell you that much. Now, after you've done all of this, after you've read all these novels I recommend, and you're ready to take the next step, I recommend this. The Essentials Reader's Companion. Now, you don't need this to organize your bookshelf, unless you don't care about everything in chronological order. Well, I'm kind of like that. This is a good way of getting yourself familiar with the expanded universe more, and it also could be a good buyer's guide too, and discover some stories that you may not know about, because the Star Wars expanded universe is so big that you're not going to know everything. Not to mention, there's some behind the scenes stuff that's talked about too. Of course, the person that wrote this is none other than that. Well, I'm not going to talk about my personal feelings towards that man, but Papa Hidalgo wrote this. And despite how I feel about him personally, I think he did a great job writing this. And not to mention, this is a great defense for the Star Wars expanded universe. This also is a good way of learning more about the expanded universe. And actually, some of you may have heard about the contradictions in the EU, but this is proof that all those contradictions that people love to talk about are lies. And this is basically the Bible of the Star Wars expanded universe. Everything in here is part of that. It's canon. It's not part of the main canon timeline anymore, but it's still part of the original. Now, what should you do if you want to start buying these? Well, keep your options open. If you're looking to read the comics, I recommend digital, because most of the comics are so expensive to buy because they're out of print. And these epic collections are really fucking expensive, insane. Unless you're a person, you're like me, who prefers physical copies, because I'm a fucking idiot and loves to spend more money than necessary because I like to hold something in my hand. Also, use Amazon, eBay. Those are great combinations. eBay for the comics, Amazon for anything you can buy brand new. And by doing this, you support Legends. Anything with this is the expanded universe. Anything that doesn't have a Legends label on it, or doesn't have this shape, is Legends. Any paperback that gets released that looks nothing like that is Disney canon. And that's how you can tell the difference. The expanded universe is very easy to get into. I mean, if I can get into the Star Trek EU, which is so much bigger than the Star Wars expanded universe. My God, if you look at the post-Nemesis era of Star Trek, it makes the post-Return of the Jedi era look like nothing in terms of continuity. I mean, the size. There's like over 100 books that take place in that era alone. Shit. If it's easy to get into those books, then Star Wars should be a breeze. Honestly. This is Darcenovia, over and out. May the Force be with you. And hopefully, everything I told you was helpful. If you got any further questions, comment below. May we live long and prosper, everyone. Later.